Hey everyone, it's Ollie Linley here from One Number. Today we're going to take a look at how to conditionally format measure names. So this is a nice little workaround for a particular scenario that we encountered with a client recently. So I've put together something of a workaround, but really it's so context dependent that I'm sure you'll find a good use case for it in your particular context. But suppose we have a view like this one. Just taking a look at this, you'll notice that we have sum of profit and measure values as a dual axis chart in this view. And our measure values contains a little calculation called the rest of the bar and sum of sales. Let me just show you what rest of bar is doing. It's basically just taking our window max sum of sales and minusing sum of sales to give it this effect that like our sum of sales is sort of filling up the view to equal the maximum sales value, right? Something like that. So it's like an aesthetic effect. Our sum of sales is sitting here, so that's the dark gray bars. And then we've got sum of profit, and we've got profit is greater than 0 or less than 0. So there's actually quite a lot going on here, and maybe it's too busy, and maybe we should just display this information in two charts, but we want it in one. Now, what's interesting is by default, our little measure values is colored by measure names. Our measure values marks card is colored by measure names. So, what does that do? Well, it gives us one color for sales and one color for this rest of the bar. If I were to do something like put measure names on color, I think everything's just gonna break, to be honest. Yeah. It's not looking particularly good at all. In fact, we get this measure values color spectrum over here, which is not really what we want. So the idea of this is that we're trying to conditionally format our sales field so that we've got these sales categories, right? Like, if my sales are greater than 200,000, then they're this category. If my sales are greater than 100,000, they're this. If my sales are greater than 0, then put them in a third sort of color category. Can that work? Well, the answer is yes, and the simple workaround is to create a little measure for each of those sales categories. Does that make sense? So instead of just having sales in your measure values, we'll have rest of bar, which is still there, but now you'll notice I actually have three fields in place of that one sales field. Let me show you what those are. So we've got our sales is greater than 200,000. So that's my first condition, if sum of sales is greater than 200,000. And the key is to say, show me my sum of sales. Basically, I only want bars generated if the sum of sales is greater than 200,000. That's gonna allow me to color based on my measure names for 200,000. Then I've got greater than 100,000, but you've got to make sure that you're kind of catching these between the upper and lower limits. So we want it greater than 100,000, but less than 200,000. Otherwise, Tableau is going to try split those bars. And then sum of sales is is greater than 0. Technically, we want it to say it's less than 100,000. Otherwise, if we say it's greater than 0, it's going to try and encapsulate all the other information that we've already tried to sift out in these. Then by dragging those three fields onto our measure values, we're actually saying, look, whenever the sum of sales is greater than 200,000, generate me a bar. So these two bars are generated specifically from this field. Isn't that cool? And these three bars are generated specifically from this field, and these bars are generated specifically from this field. So that allows us to have this super cool measure names color palette up here, as well as a profit color palette. So now I can double click on measure names and identify like individual colors for these. So you're kind of working around some of the limitations of coloring either on measure names or on just one measure like sales. So hopefully that's been helpful. This workbook is in the description below if you want to download that and follow along. If you've got any other questions, or I don't know, you're trying to get it to work in your specific use case, you're welcome to reach out. We'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, if you want to learn a little bit more about Tableau, why not join us for a class sometime soon? We'd love to have you. Awesome, all the best.